Hello, I'm Paul Hendricks, one of the assistant bishops from the Archdiocese of Southwark in South London, in England. I'd just like to introduce very briefly a recording of a Zoom conference organised by our Diocesan Unity Commission. Our plan was to bring together people involved in dialogue between churches and dialogue between different religions to see what we could learn from each other. Along with myself, speaking about dialogue between churches, we had invited Robin Orton, who chairs our Unity Commission. And speaking about dialogue between different religions, we invited Father David Stanley and Deacon John Daldin from our Southwark Committee for Interreligious Dialogue. You join us as our meeting is just getting underway. Okay. We're hoping that there will be time for a period of discussion using some breakout rooms, and that will be allocated randomly. It's the easiest way to do it. So we're hoping that works okay. We've tried it out experimentally before. And as I mentioned earlier, you may like to make use of the chat facility. If there are any question that may occur to you, even while someone's speaking, if you'd just like to sort of type it into the chat, and we can come back to that a little bit later on. So I'd like to begin by well, certainly welcoming everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. And it's good to see a good number of old friends and some new ones, which is lovely. It has been suggested that it might be good to do something which some of us have been doing for the past week, which is just praying in particular for those affected by the pandemic, and to pray for an end to the pandemic. So just like to do that for a moment. If we just pause for a moment, gather our thoughts, and ask the Lord to be with us. And I'm going to use a prayer which is from the our Catholic Bishops' Conference Mass in time of pandemic. I'm going to be using that in just a moment. Almighty
Paul, you are muted.
Okay. Thank you. Almighty and eternal God, our refuge in every danger, to whom we turn in our distress. In faith we pray, look with compassion on the afflicted, grant eternal rest to the dead, comfort to mourners, healing to the sick, peace to the dying, strength to healthcare workers, wisdom to our leaders, and the courage to reach out to all in love, so that together we may give glory to your holy name. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. So, I'd like to, I don't know whether the, perhaps I should run briefly through the programme. We're intending to reflect, John Daldin and myself, on a quick overview of the ecumenical scene in today, and similarly with the interreligious relations and dialogue, focusing particularly on our experience in Britain. Then we're going to have two other speakers, Robin and David, to reflect on the two groups within our diocese, the Unity Commission and the Committee for Interreligious Relations, and with a period of questions after that, and then the current health and hopes of the two groups, Christian Unity Commission and Committee for Interreligious Relations. We're hoping then out of that, that will stimulate some of our thinking on some of these, what issues are showing up for both forms of dialogue, what we can learn from each other, and then moving from then into a period of discussion in smaller groups. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. So it's down to me to begin. So thinking about the ecumenical scene in Britain in particular, I want to note what huge progress that has been made. It's often forgotten, particularly following the Second Vatican Council. It's often said that up till then, Catholics hadn't been allowed to attend services in other churches. And ecumenism was often thought of as something that only other churches did. And it's true that ecumenism did begin with a fairly small number of churches, but it increased considerably over the years. And now in Churches Together in England, we've actually got up to a total of 50 member churches. And particularly in recent years, we've welcomed a considerable number of churches, a range of churches in the Catholic and the Orthodox traditions, and a much larger number of the newer evangelical, charismatic, and Pentecostal churches. There's much more acceptance now that we can all learn from each other. And for instance, it's often noted that Catholics now make more use of the Bible, while even the churches that emphasize the word more than the sacrament now celebrate the Eucharist more often. These are just things that sort of gradually developed and almost taken for granted now. But it is quite a change from what it used to be when I was a child. The recent development of receptive ecumenism, well, over the last 10 and 15 years, takes the idea of mutual learning a bit further. I often say that we need to understand those things that each denomination loves about its own tradition, so that they may become something which we can also embrace. So it seems to me it's very much about what can I learn from other Christian traditions. How can I make that part of my own patrimony or my own experience? It seems to me that receptive ecumenism is important because agreement on doctrine at an official level is never going to be enough on its own. If it's going to make any practical impact, even when, to what extent it comes, we have made a lot of progress on this, but to have any practical impact, it would also need to be, we would also need to be more united on a human and a spiritual level, so that we actually have a real appreciation of each other's traditions. Otherwise, it's just liable to be a sort of theoretical thing, which doesn't mean so much. In any form of dialogue, we struggle with the fact that words are not always used in the same way. I suspect that's just as true in interfaith dialogue. And in particular, people can have quite different ideas about what unity means, even within the same denomination. When the United Reformed Church was formed in the 1970s, it brought together the Congregational and Presbyterian churches in England. And this created a new institution with its own structures, its own rules and ways of working. And it's often taken for granted that when we talk about unity, it means something like this, a new institution. You know, certain churches, as it were, ceasing to exist separately, and a new church coming into being. And as a result of that, many people more or less take it for granted that unity will ultimately require that we get rid of all the things which are different in each denomination. You might sort of loosely call this a sort of dumbing down. In recent years, the idea has been much more that churches will work together towards what we call full communion, in which each church will still have its own identity. And we already have a model for this in terms of the relationship between the Catholic Latin Rite and Eastern Rite churches. They remain with their own identity, liturgy, spirituality, culture, but are in fact, in full communion. One advantage of this is that it allows for a range of different liturgical, spiritual, cultural traditions of each denomination. In fact, this becomes a strength rather than a problem. But I should point out that a certain level of agreement on key doctrinal issues would still be needed for full communion to be possible. One of the challenges of ecumenism is that as some obstacles are overcome, others arise to take their place. Now that many divisions from the time of the Reformation have been at least partly healed, issues of sexuality and gender have become increasingly divisive between Christian denominations and even within individual churches. And these are tensions that our churches are already struggling with, and it seems to me that the way forward is still very far from clear. Despite these difficulties, there are two key things I would want to emphasize. Firstly, unity between Christians must always be our goal. Secondly, we must be open to its happening in God's time and in the way He wills it. And I think this is very likely to be in ways that we would never have expected. So that's my little input there. And I'm going to invite John now to give an overview of the picture in the interreligious relations side of things.
Got to get all this stuff together.
That's it.
Yeah, okay, yeah, well, good evening to everybody. Wonderful. And thanks for inviting me here. It is just an overview and it's not going to cover everything, but hope there'll be loads of questions afterwards. So now I'm going to try and do some screen sharing in a minute with some pretty useless slides, but they may help. Interreligious relations and dialogue in Britain today are constantly increasing, with more people of all faiths taking part in activities and joint projects to help build community cohesion. There are positive relations both within faith traditions as well as an excellent level of dialogue between faiths. But I think it's good to get a little bit of background and look at some statistics to see exactly what the situation is. So if I can find this screen share thing, where is it? Chat, screen share. Anything's happening?
Not yet.
Okay, so we're looking at the census for 2011. We'll have a census again next year. And you'll notice that in the last two censuses, only 6 faiths were specified, although there are 9 officially recognized. There are plenty more than 9 in the country, but only 9 were recognized. And in 2011, out of a population of 56 million, nearly 60% specified they were Christian. 25% said they didn't belong to any religion, and nearly 5% were Muslim. 1.5 said they were Hindu. And you've got the actual percentages there. But we can look at the next one. Where is it? No. So the other faiths that weren't specified, these are the faiths that were specified, as you see, and there were other faiths, Baha'i, Jain, Zoroastrians. Under other faiths, 40 turned up, and they ranged from animism to Zoroastrianism. And what was quite interesting, under no religion, there were more heavy metal and Jedi Knight followers than Zoroastrians in Great Britain. If we look at religions in London in 2011, you'll see that the population was just over 8 million, and 48% said they were Christians, so nearly half, whereas over 20% didn't subscribe to a religion. About 1 million said they were Muslim, 5% were Hindus, and just under 2% were Jews and Sikhs. And then the others we will see briefly. roughly 26,000 people involved in Baha'is, Jains, pagans, Rastafarians, Zoroastrians, and so on. So I've got us seeing here events since World War II because there really there's been people of different faiths in Britain for ages, but there's no official interfaith organization existed since the Second World War, when the Council for Christians and Jews was set up in 1942 as a response to anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. However, most organizations dealing with interreligious relations didn't materialize till the 1980s, mainly in response to national and international situations. And I've mentioned a few things there. The Second Vatican Council, Nostra Aetate, basically allowed Catholics, as well as anything on ecumenism, to reach out and meet other people and actually enter into dialogue. Then, of course, there was the independence of the colonies, expulsion of foreigners from East Africa, which meant lots of people were coming into Britain from overseas. There were then race riots and demonstrations in the 70s, and there was a response immediately by some groups in South London. The South London Interfaith Group tried to do something, and in Southall, Westminster Interfaith came into existence to do the same things. The Committee for Other Faiths was set up by the Catholic Bishops' Conference, and then in '86, United Nations Year of Peace, Pope John Paul II held a prayer meeting, and in 1987, the Interfaith Network came into existence. But really, as I said, that was after the 80s, but nothing really happened until after the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers, and that led to the development of lots of different forums of faith throughout the country at local, regional, and national level. And most of these forums of faith now are also members of the Interfaith Network UK. So you can see just a few examples of some of the things that happened there. Christian Muslim Forum was set up. Then we got into Faith Week, which has really, really helped to build activities and dialogue between people. And we actually celebrated Interfaith Week just a couple of weeks ago. And every year, the number of interfaith activities and projects has increased enormously. Even this year, with coronavirus pandemic and lockdown, there have been many exciting, imaginative, and fruitful projects. Many of these projects have arisen from traditional practices in the different faiths. And I'm just going to quote a few of them. Mitzvah Day, which coincides now with the Day of the Poor, which Pope Francis set up. And that's at the end of Interfaith Week every year. All the different religious festivals, I'm not going to list them all, Diwali, Ramadan, Eid, and so on. Now, other opportunities for coming together are the International Peace Day in September, Harmony Week in February, Week of Interfaith Prayer, and One World Week at the end of October. And of course, Interfaith Week, which always now happens between the week, the Remembrance Sunday for 8 days. Then, of course, there have been interfaith walks and multi-faith pilgrimages, visits to places of worship, which has often led to twinning of mosques and churches. We have scriptural reasoning, which has really taken off very well. I've been to scriptural reasoning events that have involved, in some cases, maybe half a dozen, in other cases, 50 or 60 people. Very interesting way, especially amongst the Abrahamic faith. So Muslims, Christians, and Jews come together, sharing something from their scripture. It's helped enormously with religious literacy. And then, of course, we've got forums of faith that developed after 9/11. And these are still very active. I mean, I receive invitations for things that are happening in Milton Keynes and various other places, and now actually could join places throughout the country, in Scotland and in the north. and members come together to plan joint activities in their area, celebrate a religious festival, respond to attacks on places of worship, and so many other things, including to cooperate during the coronavirus pandemic, helping with food banks, reaching out to the needy, delivering food to people, holding interfaith prayer sessions, and so on. Recently, on one of these Zoom things, I listened to an imam and a Catholic priest in Solihull sharing how they and their congregations are working together to provide food and support to those people in need. In short, I really am encouraged by the level of dialogue and interreligious relations that exists in Britain, probably because I'm actively involved in it. However, I'm still concerned by the lack of interest in interfaith matters by certain sectors of our society. Indeed, I have to say that there's often enormous opposition to attempts to reach out and cooperate with people of other faiths. I don't want to quote loads of examples, but it happens. If we wish to live in a peaceful and a harmonious society, I think we need to get to know one another better, care for each other as members of the one human family, and as I think all the popes since Vatican II have stated many times over and over again, interreligious dialogue is not an option, but a necessity. Now, where's this? That's about it. I can't see how I get out of this sharing, but anyway, there, done it.
That's lovely. Thanks very much, John. Yes, thanks, Alessia, for handling that for us. So we're going to move straight on now because we've got a period for questions, but after the next couple of short presentations. So I'm going to invite Robin now. He chairs our Unity Commission. And Robin, if you could speak on the history and the remit of our Diocesan Unity Commission, or at least a very quick overview.
Yes, thank you. I am unmuted, aren't I? Yes, I hope. The stated purpose of the Archdiocese of Southwark Christian Unity Commission is, quote, to implement the Archbishop's ecumenical policy and to promote ecumenical activity in the Archdiocese, unquote. The members are appointed by the Archbishop. Bishop Paul is our president, and we also have 2 deacons and 1 religious sister. But there are currently no priests. Our constitution says we should have some priests, but we haven't been able to find anyone to take it on. What the significance of that is might be worth discussing later on. We've got 6 lay people, including me as the chair, and our secretary Gwen and our treasurer Teresa are also lay people. Now, the commission was set up in 1977, which is a time of ecumenical optimism. Its main business initially was to educate Roman Catholics into taking ecumenism seriously on the lines laid down by the Second Vatican Council, and to recognize that being a Catholic now meant to think and to act ecumenically. Each parish priest in the diocese was asked to appoint somebody, usually a lay person, as what we call the parish unity contact, a PUC. This would be someone whose task was to drive forward ecumenical effort in the parishes by raising awareness amongst lay people, and also by forming links with other local churches of other denominations, e.g. through local churches together groups. Now, PUCs, parish unity contacts, receive formation, training from the commission. Characteristically, we invited them to come to training events, which we as the commission laid on twice a year. And And this approach did have some success, and it's clear that a number of parishes became fully involved in ecumenical activity at the local level. Nevertheless, there's no doubt that from the mid-1980s onwards, there's something of a chill came over the wider ecumenical scene. There were a number of reasons for this, but thinking in terms solely of relations between the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England, I don't think one can deny that the decision of the Church of England in 1994 to ordain women as priests and then to ordain or consecrate women as bishops in 2015 put enormous obstacles in the path towards the mutual recognition of ministries, which of course would be a very important element, the key element arguably in an eventual organic union between the churches. And the Pope St. John Paul II had warned about this in 1988, but of course it's as you know, it's gone ahead. Now, this chill has certainly affected our own work as a commission. I mean, at the diocesan level, we've noted that the number of people actively interested in our work seems to have fallen off, and there's been a steady decline in the number attending the meetings we've arranged. At the parish level, we've no real hard information about what's going on. We know that there are increasing demands everywhere on keen, committed and articulate lay people. And we suspect that this may have had an adverse effect on the numbers prepared actively to involve themselves in ecumenical work. Another factor is that the generation who were infused and inspired by the new visions of Vatican II and the dream that organic unity was just around the corner are now getting very old or dying out. And the new blood in our parishes, this is particularly, I think, true in South London, often comes from people from overseas who may have been brought up in an environment in which interchurch relations are not viewed in the same way as they are in Europe and North America. There are obviously various historical reasons for this, which I'm sure you can guess. And then with some younger Christians, they may in any case take what has been called a post-denominational attitude, and they've become perhaps impatient with church divisions based on what they see as ancient and irrelevant theological disputes. Now I'll stop there for the moment. I'm sure this all sounds a bit gloomy, but I hope and intend to be more positive when I speak later about the current health and hopes of our commission. Thank you all very much.
Thanks very much, Robin. And so I'd like to ask David now to give a sort of equivalent picture now from the interreligious point of view. And then after that, we will have an opportunity for any questions. So David. You're still muted, David.
Right now?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Well, yes, I'm David Stanley, a retired priest now in Southwark. And I have been on the committee for a number of years and chair for the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, in the process of trying to retire, but it's difficult to find anyone else. I'm not sure about the origins, actually, of this committee, but I do know that Bishop Henderson, some of you will remember him, was very active in this field and grew more active as he grew older. I think both in ecumenism and in interfaith matters. And not only for the diocese, but I think also for the country. So we do owe him, Bishop Henderson and Anne Noonan were two big people in the beginnings of this work. I noticed Barbara Wood is here. You probably know more about the origins of this than I do. It's interesting that the name has settled down to be the Committee for Interreligious Relations, not for interfaith matters. And that's because of a sensitivity coming from the Vatican that interfaith really should be restricted to relations with the Jewish people, I think, and religious relations for other religious traditions. I think that's right. Now, it was boosted by the document brought out by the Bishops' Conference in England and Wales in 2010 called Meeting God in Friend and Stranger. And I hope even ecumenists might have read this or seen this. Here it is, still in print, I think, I hope. It is really a very helpful document, both in terms of practice and theology, about the background to the growth in the Catholic Church's interest and activity in interfaith or interreligious relations. The remit of the committee, a bit like yours in ecumenism, is to raise the consciousness, if possible, in parishes, that this is not only a legitimate, but an essential feature of what it is to be a Catholic community. And that is it's a big shift, because ecumenism we were nervous about ecumenical relations. We were much more nervous about interreligious relations. And it probably will take a generation or more to try and develop a much more openness and respect and appreciation of people in other religious traditions. So what happens? Well, we do have some very good discussions in the committee, but that's not enough. That's more talking. In the past, we have promoted different events and asked people to speak at them. Chris Hewer, who knows a lot about relations with Islam, and Michael Barnes, the Jesuit, who knows an awful lot, has a lot of experience about this. We have invited them, and they have come and given talks. Not many people have attended, it's true. And I think that has tailed off, and we don't promote many specific events in the present time. Paradoxically, it may be that Zoom and its like could open up things, and people will come more to things online than they might on a winter night, traveling across South London. So we try to encourage, information goes around, we try to encourage parishes in different ways. We remind them of different feasts that are occurring in different religious traditions, and encourage people to include a note about that and a prayer about that in the intercessions. Interfaith walks, John has mentioned them. We would aspire to have a representative in each parish who would be nudging the parish when there are moments to pray for people from other religions, or to notice events that are happening that we need to pray about that affect them more. On a specific issue, we've tried to help parishes notice interfaith marriages, which are increasing, where parishioners or people in families of parishioners are marrying people from other faith traditions, and really to try and do what we can to welcome that and encourage people in those situations. One nice thing is the Vatican, from time to time, especially at the end of Ramadan, but also for other feasts, sends a message to to be delivered to local mosques or temples, greetings from the Catholic Church on the occasion of these feasts. And I don't think it happens much, but where it happens, it's extremely well received. It's a very simple thing to do. You know, 4 or 5 parishioners going to a mosque on a Friday, perhaps, and delivering this message. And it's so well received, surprised, but received. That's a simple thing to do. And I would like it to be done much more than it is, I think. There are all sorts of questions about what we can share and what we can't. One thing that has grown up in some places is, and I think it's a mosque initiative where the birth of Muhammad, which I think moves through the year, coincides with Christmas, more or less. They have invited Christians to come and for each group to tell the story of the birth of Muhammad and the birth of Jesus. Now, of course, they are different in the way we understand them, but it's a very nice thing to do. And it's a meeting point of people locally from the mosque and the church. I think Chris Hewer certainly felt that Catholics are not pulling their weight, given their numbers, in the matter of interreligious relations. And probably true in ecumenism as well. And we need to ask why that is and what can be done to change that. It does seem to be an optional extra, a hobby for a few people. It's not that. It's something that is integral now to what it means to be a Catholic Christian. I think we noticed that when schools, religious schools, are now required by law to teach something about at least one other religious tradition, I think the Catholic Church in this country has chosen Judaism as the religion to focus on. And some people think that's a shame. I think it was chosen because of our roots, Christian roots, within the Jewish tradition. But that's really not the point. The point is to look at another religious tradition on its own merits and to know something more about it, not because of its connection with Christianity. So there's a question there, but that's a larger question than just this diocese. I think the fact is we don't really know much about what's going on in local parishes because it's not gathered and it's not reported and collected. Maybe more is going on than we know, and especially in the dialogue of life. In the document from the bishops, they talked about these dialogues, you know, the dialogue of life, which is neighborliness, knowing your neighbors and knowing something about their religious traditions and learning from them. That's a simple thing to do. It's natural. I do wish it would happen more, but maybe it happens more than we know. And more is going on than we know. Let's hold on to that. I'll stop there for now.
That's great, David. Thank you very much. Perhaps I could pick up a point from Robin in the chat. If we take a few minutes for questions, whether you could say a bit more, David, about the difference between relations with Judaism and with other religions, from the sort of the reason why we make that distinction.
Well, I think, you know, St. Paul began the struggle about what is the place of the Jewish people and the Jewish tradition now that Christ has come. he struggled with that himself. He agonized about it. And of course, there has been a very dark history, even within the Christian church, of anti-Semitism. But there's been a more recent document from the Vatican about Jewish-Christian relations, which affirms that God has never withdrawn his choice of the Jewish people. Now, how that is to be integrated finally, within the revelation of God to us, centered in Christ, we cannot see, but they will have their place. And I rather like the story of a rabbi going to the Vatican and meeting the Pope, and they were talking together about this and that. And the rabbi said, when we eventually stand together before the Lord, when he comes at the end of time, we will have to ask him, is this your first or second visit? And it's marvelous that could be said. It's such a serious question about what we believe, but could be said in a light tone. That we will discover. But I think the relationship, Christian relationship with the Jewish tradition is special. And that's acknowledged as such in the Vatican and in the Church. And of course, with the death of the chief rabbi recently, many Christians have mourned his passing. He was such a great man, and it's so much to tell us, reveal to us about the Hebrew Scriptures. Yes. So it is distinct. It is distinct within the overall interreligious scene. Yeah.
Thank you, David. There's a more general question, which I think we might take up when we divide into groups, possibly. How do we get more Catholics interested in ecumenism? Other Christians seem more keen to join in projects than do Catholics. There might be an interesting question as regards interfaith as well, or interreligious dialogue, where possibly it might be the other way around, but at least in terms of theory. Anyway, that's maybe something to come back to. Maybe if we move on to Robin now, in terms of the current health and hopes of the Unity Commission, and then input also then from David and John on the interreligious side, and then that will sort of complete, then we'll have a basis for reflecting. So back to you, Robin, please. That's it.
Yeah. I'm just looking for, I'm trying to get out, find a way of
You're unmuted, okay.
Exit full screen. Done it. Okay, done it. I think. Yep. Right. Yep. The a bit about where we go now in the Christian Unity Commission. As I said earlier, the Commission's official purpose is to implement the Archbishop's ecumenical policy and to promote ecumenical activity in the Archdiocese. Now, you'll notice that unlike, for example, pastoral councils, whether at parish or deanery or diocesan level, we've no official advisory function. Our role is concerned with implementing and promoting. Now, of those two official functions, we've never really given much attention to implementing the diocese's ecumenical policy. This is because we haven't really got any what one might call executive competence. we can't actually make things happen within the diocese, as we've discovered. Only bishops and priests can do that. And a good example of this was a very successful joint Anglican Roman Catholic pilgrimage to the Holy Land, which happened in March this year, just before lockdown. This was an initiative by the Anglican and Roman Catholic cathedral deans, with active support and involvement by the bishops on both sides. We in the commission were not involved at all in the planning or organisation. I think it emphasises something of the ambiguity of our role as a largely lay body. We stand outside what I might call the management structure of the church. Now, our other official function is promoting ecumenical activity in the diocese, and that doesn't really raise the same kind of problem. In my earlier talk, I described how our original strategy to equip lay people in the parishes to take the lead in ecumenical activity at a local level had achieved some success, but had now run a bit out of steam. I think that the central element in our plans for the future is that we've largely reimagined, fashionable word, I think, the functions of the twice yearly event for all comers, which I'd mentioned in our earlier talk. We've been regularly organising. We used to design these primarily as teaching sessions for Catholics to bring them up to speed on ecumenism. But now we see them more as opportunities for initiating discussions and dialogue about some of the big issues which are having to be addressed if we're to make further progress on the road to unity. And we've explicitly opened these events to Christians from other traditions than ours. And indeed, we've increasingly invited Christians from other traditions to help lead our discussions. So we've tried to follow the principles of receptive ecumenism, which Bishop Paul mentioned earlier. The stress is no longer on explaining and defending our own beliefs and practices, but it's rather on asking what we can learn from those of other Christians. One of our recent events was, in fact, on the topic of receptive ecumenism. We've also arranged a joint event with the Anglican Diocese of Southwark to try and develop links and cooperation between us in the field of what is now known as JPIC, Justice, Peace and the Integrity of Creation. And we've invited Roman Catholic and Anglican speakers to lead a very interesting event on the recent document which was issued by the ARCIC, the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission, which was called Walking Together on the Way, which had a lot of very interesting stuff about how people the two churches can walk together in all sorts of different ways. For one of our future plans is that we hope to organise a discussion about the implications for church unity of the establishment in 2011 of the personal ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham, the ordinariate which, as you know, was set up to provide a place in the Roman Catholic Church for Anglicans who wanted to maintain something of their Anglican patrimony. Now, obviously, an organisation like ours, a purely regional setup like ours, is not going to be in a position to provide anything like however many of these discussions and conferences we have. We're not going to provide anything in the way of a definite solution to any of the theological or cultural issues which stand in the way of our moving together towards some sort of organic unity between Christians of different traditions. But in our view, it's this sort of continuing prayerful dialogue at all levels that's likely to provide, as it were, well-watered or well-manured, if you like, soil in which the Holy Spirit can plant the seeds, which will eventually grow into the fruit which we all long for, which is that we may all be one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robin. I think that I've got both David and John down for the next, our final little bit of input. I'm not sure who'd like to kick off there, or whether, but over to you anyway.
John, do you want to go?
I'm here somewhere.
Yes, you're on.
You're coming on, coming through, yes.
I'm there, yeah. I'm just looking at one of the questions there. I wonder whether David and John might like to comment on what we can learn from other religions, rather similar to receptive ecumenism.
Yes.
Well, I would say immediately that I think, well, personally speaking, anyway, for me, it's exactly the same thing. It is receptive, inter-religious factor. I mean, since I've been involved in inter-religious relations encounter, I think my own faith, I've had to question my own faith and where I stand, and I think it's become richer, and certainly knowing about other people's faiths and what they can offer us, rather than what we can offer them. It can go both ways. Has been particularly helpful in every single respect, not just in terms of what they believe, but also in their practices. You know, whether it's mitzvah for the Jewish community or siwa for the Eastern religions, their sense of community that they have. There are so many things that they have, and even their worship. I mean, you know, somebody was explaining quite clearly only the other day when they say namaste, namaste as a greeting. They're bowing not to you as an individual, but the divinity that is present within each person, and that's just a beautiful thought. And to think that, you know, we are all made in the image of God, but sometimes we forget that, and that divine spark, that divine presence is there, which is very much a feature of all the Eastern religions. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from other religions. It's just a question of meeting them and finding out. And anyway.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Yes. Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay.
John. Yeah. David,
thank you, John. And I do want to us to realize that John's publication for the Westminster Diocese of the Interfaith Westminster newsletter is so full of information and articles that I know we in Southwark benefit from that as well, and we should be grateful. We are grateful to you, John, for all the work that goes into that. I think the question of generations was said earlier. I think, Robin, you said that the Vatican II, we are the Vatican, I suppose we are mainly older here on the screen now. The Vatican II generation seemed to have more excitement about ecumenism and interfaith matters. And that is not so evident in the younger people. I think one of the reasons is because we older people came from a much more secure background and therefore had the roots and the energy to risk and be excited by new things. I think the younger people now have much more insecure roots and are not so excited about new things. They really want to be rooted somewhere. And their energy for moving out seems to be less. And in connection with that, I mean, I think I wonder how ecumenism and inter-religious relations are taught in the seminary, to trainee priests, and what emphasis and what angle it is put across, and how it's received by students for the priesthood or diaconate. And that would be interesting to know.
Can I butt in there?
Yes.
I've been doing interreligious dialogue with the seminary at Allen Hall for the past couple of years, and certainly the first year I think I got quite a lot of opposition, and the rector took me aside one day and sort of said, I feel you're having a challenging time. And I just sort of said, well, it's nothing I didn't expect. I expected to be challenged and have a lot of reaction and thing. And the whole thing of Vatican II came up. And the question I was asked was, should we be looking at the documents of Vatican II? I said, of course you should. So, you know, maybe Vatican II documents were looked at, but not specifically the ones on ecumenism and interreligious dialogue. So that was an interesting thing. However, I have to say that also now that certainly both the seminaries are going to St. Mary's in Twickenham, and they will be getting, I mean, I met some priests from ordained recently, past couple of years, who went on courses on interreligious dialogue and joined, you know, Michael Barnes when it was Heathrop College and so on. And they're people I know who are very committed to it. But I don't think it's played very, given as much importance as it should do. And equally, I would say, I've heard very, very few priests preach on either ecumenism or interfaith. So, you know, I think that's also some area that could be explored.
Yeah.
Just one other thing I would want to say before we go further, and that is we know that faith, at least in terms of belonging to a religious tradition, is ebbing in our society. And when the census comes out next year, I think it will be revealed that fewer and fewer people claim to belong to any particular religious tradition. And that opens up the question of the dialogue with non-believers or unbelievers and how they fit into this. We know that some agnostics and humanists do want to be included in a forum where other faiths are represented. Some people do want that. And one initiative, which is, I think, very, very nice, is, at least in the United States, of a meeting of nuns and nuns. Do you know about that? NUNS and NONES. And this is an initiative from religious sisters who want a gentle dialogue between people who are committed to their religious life and others who have no commitment to any religious faith. And it proves to be a very interesting engagement. You know, the NONES are interested in the curiosity. They're curious, at least, about religious commitment. And they find common ground. They find common ground. So that's another dimension.
I'm going to butt in this again, David. Only a few weeks ago, I organised a seminar where I invited a humanist to come and talk from Lancashire to the group. That was very enlightening. But equally, over the years, at Sacre meetings and various other things, humanists who'd like to come there and participate have felt very, very excluded. Even at the Cenotaph on Remembrance Day, humanists have been excluded from that, and yet many humanists, agnostics, atheists, whatever, were very much involved in the war as well, but they're not represented. It's just certain religions, really. I think it's a question of inclusion. I mean, we're all part of one human family, and it's our responsibility, our duty as Christians to get to know one another and reach out to everybody, whoever they are.
Yes.
And I think dialogue with humanists, agnostics, or anything else is something that we should be entering in more and more. As David, you just said, the numbers probably in the census next year will indicate a much larger number of people who state they don't have religion. So do we just ignore them?
John, I see that Jill has a question, and it may be better to carry on in this format without breaking into groups. So we'll see how it goes. I just mentioned before going over to Jill that we've in my Bishop's Conference, we've had for the last couple of years a very interesting and enjoyable dialogue with the British Humanists. No, it's Humanist UK, I think it's called now, and very constructive. Jill, would you like to ask a question?
Well, yeah, actually, it's not a question, really.
Oh,
It's just actually to say that I had the privilege actually being at Heathrow for about 10 years and working with well, I can't say Andrew, can I? Michael Barnes. And and you were mentioned about young people earlier this evening. I think David Stanley did. And what I was impressed with was in 2005 when I finished my ordinary BA and MA, first MA, but in 2005 we had far more young people from different religions who came to Heathrow, both Muslim and Jewish, and the friendships that developed, the way that and it wasn't to talk necessarily about even the religious, or maybe something vague like, how do you understand God? You know, just how they understand God, and how do you understand God, and so on. But actually in the lectures, of course, you get down to the nitty gritty. But it's certainly, I think that young people would that came to Heathrow, obviously to do either philosophy or theology, were very interested in Christianity as well as other faiths. And it was wonderful to see the Jewish lecturer being hugged by 2 Muslim students who said, oh, we loved you, we didn't want to go, we didn't want to go. And I just thought, you know, it's just being able to listen to other people. The other thing I just want to quickly say is that because of through Heathrow, I go to a centre in London called for dialogue for encounter between Christians and Jewish people, you know, Jewish religion. And I can't remember the exact title, which is annoying, but it's in Notting Hill. And Michael Barnes and some of the other lecturers go there. And that is absolutely fascinating to learn about the roots. And like you mentioned, David and John and Paul all mentioned about the roots that, you know, we come straight from the Jewish tradition. If it wasn't for the Jews, none of us would be here. And, you know, it's just that we are just the branches. They are, you know, the main vine. And that covenant that stands between the Jews and God is still standing. We don't overtake it. We don't push it aside. We just hope that one day they all see Jesus as a Messiah. And I think that when you learn about how the Jewish thing, we do the Torah, the parasha every week, and you see how they respond to their actual scriptures, which is, it taught me so much because I've never heard that in Christianity for any length of time, really. So I do think that dialogue, as we've all said, it's essential if we want to know more about our own faith. Thank you. That's all.
thank you, Jill. Would you like to comment on that?
Who's that, me?
John or David?
Yeah, I can comment on everything, really. I think, first of all, about young people, I have a lot more hope for young people, even though they may not necessarily be going to church and various other things like that. But certainly in my experience, Jewish volunteer service, Assumptionists, volunteers, various other people, I've had to sort of take them along to visit places of worship and give them a little bit of insight because they're going abroad to different countries. And I've found very, very positive responses amongst them. Parliamentary interns, young parliamentary interns who come along, get a little bit of interfaith training. But then just talking to young people generally, even at work, which I'm not working at the moment, it's the young people on the whole who are working for Caritas and various other groups who come along showing interest in lots and lots of things. The Jewish thing, well, I think one of the things that we could do, and I certainly encourage people to do, is to actually go along to a Shabbat service or any other service run in a synagogue, whichever tradition, Jewish tradition it is, and actually see how much of our own liturgy stems from that. I mean, it was quite funny when I took a group of people to a synagogue a few years ago, and a number of people came out and sort of said, they use the same psalms that we do. Why is that? You know, little things like this. And I think we could actually learn a lot from that Jewish thing. And final to Jill, yes, I certainly regret the loss of Heathrop College, because I too made lots of friends and acquaintances and had wonderful conversations with people while I was studying at Heathrop. And there's nothing quite like it around at the moment. Anyway, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you, John. At this point in our conference, we divided into breakout rooms to give an opportunity for more of our participants to join in the discussion. After about 10 minutes, we came together and shared some of our thoughts. I think we may be all back. Thank you very much for staying on. I hope that sort of worked reasonably well. We've only got a limited time now, but whether anyone might like to sort of share anything that came up in the group, or any question or any comment or anything like that. So if you'd like to, I think I can see everyone, so if you'd like to wave, and Steve and then Cecilia, perhaps.
I'd like you to answer a question that we couldn't answer in our group, which was, why is it that young Muslims seem to be very confident in their faith and happy to talk about it and so on, whereas young Christians seem rather shy and embarrassed about it? If that's true, but that was a question in our group that we didn't know.
John or David, would you have anything to?
I can answer that, no problem. I mean, first of all, they have what, like a lot of other churches, but not so much ours, because we've got Catholic schools. They have the equivalent of Sunday school, and they learn to read the Quran with an imam and others. They learn to recite it and chant it. They are given instructions in their faith from a very early age. And so then there's also very much a community aspect of going to the mosque. And so they will go to the mosque and they'll bring their children along, often even 5 times a day. Sometimes some parents will do that. And so there's a totally different approach towards it. The other thing I think is very important, we're actually seeing Muslims outside of their environment in a way. They're most of the Muslims, I mean, there are some that have converted from England, British Muslims, but there is a tendency for people from Pakistan or wherever it is to actually meet together and share things together. And I've been to many mosques where the homily has been given, the sermon has been given in Bengali because everybody there was Bengali. In other mosques I've been to, and it's been in English because it's been a mixed congregation. But there is a greater sense of community that we haven't got, and they have masses and masses of celebrations as well. All things that really help, I think, enormously to sort of engender a love for their faith.
Thank you, John. David, I wonder whether you might have any.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Might move because we're a bit limited on time. But Cecilia, you had your hand up earlier. Perhaps if you'd like to, Cecilia.
You're muted.
Oh, you're muted still. That's it.
I'm not used to it on the iPad. I just want to get more Catholics interested in ecumenical things and trying to get them to come along to meetings and join in everything. That's what I really would like to see.
I suppose there's a comment I could make on that. I suppose it applies to interreligious as well as ecumenical dialogue, is that so many priests anyway, I think, see ecumenism and interreligious dialogue as one more thing to do, like a sort of a burden. And it sort of, we need to really, you know, those of us who believe in these things very strongly, need to find ways of helping them to see that actually this can be something that gives energy rather than something that takes it away. I've certainly found it very inspiring, but both ecumenical and interreligious. But it's not easy to get that message across, really.
Yeah.
Well, our parish priest is very much ecumenical, and gets people interested. But it's people, I don't know, they just seem just happy to sit back.
Yes.
Not get involved.
Sue, I see you had your hand up just now.
Sorry to join late. I've only just got the link. In our parish, we joined London Citizens, and we then worked ecumenically. We worked on projects with the local Anglicans, and then we got involved with the mosque and a whole lot of things, and then welcomed Syrian refugees. So I think, and I can understand that priests do get overloaded, but if we can actually have a project that interests people, I think that's the way we got people ecumenically minded. I mean, I must say that Catholics are particularly not ecumenically minded, but you know, that's just, you know, does depend, but often they're not, and a lot of priests aren't. But if you're doing something practical, you can take people on, bring people on board. That's all. London Citizens is still going strong in some places. It's certainly going strong in Lambeth. It's died down a bit in Lewisham, but we worked with so many different churches and with the mosques and with the Gurdwaras. That's all I just say. That is one way forward, really.
That's great. I mean, that ties up with, David, perhaps, yes.
I had an issue at my ordination recently because I have a very good friend who is a high Anglican, and he stood in the queue to receive communion, and really I didn't hesitate in giving him communion. And I looked around and I was wondering whether I would receive a thunderbolt from somewhere, but there was no problem as far as I know. And I don't know whether that's, I know it's wrong the other way around, but I don't know whether you can give us any of your thoughts on that.
I think that's one of those occasions where certainly, you know, permission could be given. And obviously you didn't have the opportunity to ask. And I know there's a sort of a rule in canon law that sort of says, if you could sort of foresee that, you know, if the person making the law had thought of this situation, he would have probably given permission.
Yeah.
I know it's not quite the same thing, but
no. Thank you. That's an answer.
Jill.
Yeah,
I think
when I first, sorry. When I first became, well, actually, when I was invited to an ordination of a priest from college, and he said, "We must come to my ordination." I said, "Oh, I'd like to." I said, "Don't worry, I won't cause any trouble," you know, because I was definitely Protestant then, and I was only pulling his leg. But we discussed things late in the night. As I went forward, and I came for a blessing, and he went, "This is the body of Christ," and I looked at him to say, you know, it's me, you know, and there's all the bishops and archbishops there and so on, you know, and he said, "This is the body of Christ," and I took it, and that's what did it for me. I wanted to become Catholic because not because just it was the fact that I felt part of the whole of church, you know. It just seemed like heaven seemed to open up, and you know, and I just think that that's how it should be. It's the recipient that is taking it, and it's how they take it. I know people in my church, Catholic, who don't see it as the body of Christ. They just don't. They just think it's a bread which is holy, blessed by the priest, and therefore you should have it. And you know, I just feel that sometimes it's unbalanced in Catholicism. It should be an open. I do feel. I'm not saying that anyone should come to a table with dismissive, in a dismissive way, but if they're faithful and Christian, if they know the Lord, of course they should have the bread given to them. Well, I say the bread, I mean, you know, the body of Christ. But if they want to accept it as bread, well, let their faith grow. Let their faith start to understand it, because that's what did it for me, and it does yeah, anyway, but you know,
That's very interesting. Perhaps this is perhaps the other bishops. You know, be good if they could hear that same message. Yes.
Could I just very quickly say, because it was me who sort of raised this whole question about communion and high Anglican and Catholic churches, which I'm glad is sort of, you know, because it's a very important discussion. But when my mother died, and her funeral was out of London, and my younger sister, who would still say she's Catholic, but she doesn't really believe in an established church. And she asked our priest there if she could receive Holy Communion at my mother's funeral, and he asked her, well, did she really believe it was the body of Christ? She said, well, I tried to, but I really can't say that for sure. And he said, well, you mustn't actually come and receive it in that case. And she felt incredibly unhappy and sad about that.
That's very difficult because how can you, in a way, how can you be sure what you believe? I mean, that's not an easy question to answer, and sort of in terms of what do you feel, and sometimes, you know, people don't think they've got faith, but actually they've probably got more faith than they think they have. It's not an easy
I mean,
question.
very spiritual. It's just that because the rules are rules.
John.
Yeah, surely that's a pastoral consideration rather than a theological one.
Yes.
Especially in those sort of circumstances.
Yes.
And you know, and exactly the same thing as Jill, who turned around and sort of said, you know, well, it was the fact that it was possible to receive, and that's really what did it for me. I mean, you know, we don't know the power of Jesus Christ, or do we?
No.
He gave himself to everybody, didn't he? On the cross, that's when he gave everyone himself. And he didn't have to say, well, I'm not giving myself for that person or that person. No, he gave himself, and I think that's the way. Well, no, I can't say completely.
That's right.
Can I bring Sue in? I know we're getting we're a bit over time, but hopefully we'll be able to carry on just a little bit longer. Sue.
No, I just wanted to say that I had to study Eucharist for a women's ordination conference. I studied the history of the Eucharist and what St. Augustine believed. And when he elevated the host, he said the body of Christ, and they say we are. So an understanding, a really educated understanding of Eucharist will bring a lot of people in. And Jenny and I, Jenny who's here, we had a lot to do with the Iona community. They never refuse anyone communion, and it's interdenominational. And I think that once you start making rules about this, that, and the other, you'd lose opportunities which are really quite important. One of the questions is, I don't know that Jesus would have said you can't come because you don't believe this, but then I'm not a bishop, so I don't have to worry about that. So, yes. Yes.
Perhaps I could, and coming back to interfaith, maybe this might need to be the last one, I don't know, but John and David, whether you could, you know, Robin mentioned post-denominationalism. You know, particularly some of the younger folk sort of find the whole thing, different churches, rather tiresome, and does it really matter anymore? Do you get that at all within interreligious dialogue? Maybe with some, in terms of, you know, that sort of people not really seeing that the difference matters at all, in the sense, between religions.
The differences between religions. Am I muted? The differences between religions don't matter. I think when you have a fairly good understanding of the differences between religions, that's the point where you start realizing there are differences, and they don't matter. I think the point is that we really need to be focusing more on our commonality, what unites us rather than what divides us, and from then we can start looking towards the divisions. But you know, it's always looking towards this theological thing rather than you know, the dialogue of life. And on a dialogue of life, we're all the same. There is no difference whatsoever. And even in terms of any of the other dialogues that we can talk about, they don't matter. Well, they do and they don't. You know, the Hindus I know practice Hinduism fully. The Muslims I know are devout Muslims, and so on. And you know, in many cases they feel uncomfortable in this place or that place. I think they do matter, but I think it don't matter when you're talking about individuals and personal working. You work with a Hindu, you work with a Buddhist, you work with this person, and all of a sudden those differences don't matter.
No,
And then when you find out that they celebrate this festival or that festival, and you find out a bit more about it.
John, that seems like a very good note on which to end. And I don't want to run too much over time. So perhaps I could just finish by thanking you, John, and David, particularly for being with us, and to everyone for taking part. In the chat, you'll see a link to our Unity Commission website, and we'll be, I'm hoping that we'll be able to put one or two things on that in terms of possibly John's presentation, if he's willing.
Whatever, if you think it's worth using, that's fine.
And hopefully also, if we can fix it, the recording from this gathering. But,
yes, indeed.
So
before you go, Paul, I think that this is the beginning of a dialogue, I would say, rather than the end of one.
Yes. There's a lot further to go, but it's been lovely to be with you, and so thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, that completes our first attempt at an online conference. From a technical point of view, I have to admit it was probably a bit rough around the edges, so to speak. But thank you for watching. Goodbye, and God bless.